today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
how to avoid the danger of disconnection. If it feels like the distance between you and your partner is growing every day, no matter how hard you try to bridge the gap, the chances are that there's a feeling of helplessness, which is a hallmark of emotional disconnection. This tendency can go unnoticed for months or even years. And without intervention, it very often leads to separation and divorce. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And this episode is about the silent killer, how disconnection drives the divorce rate. And when I say disconnection, you're thinking, what, me? But at the same time, there are at least 50, 60% of you out there who are feeling like roommates right now instead of partners. Or maybe you feel like you're moving towards being a roommate instead of partner. You know what I mean by being a roommate? It's when you wake up in the morning and you look over and you go, who's that? That is not the person I married. How did I get here? This episode is all about how to avoid the danger of disconnection. But first, let's talk about what does it mean? How does emotional distance slowly creep in, leaving us feeling lonely, even when we're together in the same room? Let's start with how does emotional disconnection develop? You feel like you're slowly drifting apart, but you can't pinpoint why. It starts with small, insignificant changes that slowly build up into bigger issues over time. Maybe let's go back. The last episode was all about screens and manipulation. Maybe you guys are having completely different screen experiences. Like you just can't watch the same stuff. You can't find something that you agree on. By the way, that's not abnormal, right? I'll tell you that my own partner and I watch kind of different genres, but we found a sort of middle of the road that we can watch together. And so we always, not only do we have our individual interests, but we have a shared interest. But maybe you don't have that going on. Maybe it's just becoming more and more individual. Maybe you're sort of progressing from, I'm tired, let's talk later, to we just don't talk anymore, or we don't talk about anything important. Maybe you're afraid to talk about something important because if you did, that might lead to some serious disconnection, some serious aggression. It's a subtle difference, but it's powerful. If you're feeling a little bit like you're in a rut, is it possible that unresolved conflicts, unresolved differences, let's call them, or distractions, or both, may be at cause that you're kind of avoiding landmines instead of removing them? While many couples struggle with disconnection due to unresolved issues or digital distractions, and many couples have their emotional bandwidth influenced by where their attention is. Here's a fact for you. Studies show that couples who don't engage in regular, meaningful communication are more likely to experience emotional distance, leading to dissatisfaction over time. Now, in the last episode, we talked all about how the way we use screens can actually lead to distraction and emotional disconnection. But we're not just talking about that. We're talking about not having meaningful time together. And in the last episode, we wrapped it up with, hey, why don't you try shutting off your screens 2 hours before you go to bed and have just a taste of meaningful communication? This is what happens when you don't do that. If you're finding that your partner is emotionally withdrawing more and more, it's one of the clearest signs that your relationship is headed into trouble. So I want you to listen up. Maybe you're the one who's withdrawing more and more. Listen up. When one or both partners begin to disengage, it sets a stage for differences not being aired out and not being resolved. And then that builds up feelings of frustration, resentment, even loneliness. And when you have that combination, it is inevitable, no matter how much you tiptoe around it, that the fight comes up. The fight, as we call it here in Rich in Relationship, is that fight where you take the position of I'm going to win and you're going to lose, or they take the position of I'm going to win and you're going to lose. A win-lose mentality is death to your partnership, no matter who's wearing it. And that is triggered by frustration, resentment, and loneliness. Here's a fact for you. Research indicates that not only is emotional withdrawal a strong predictor of divorce, In fact, it's a stronger predictor of divorce than overt conflict. It's the slow erosion of intimacy that drives many couples apart. Intimacy is that experience where you feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to let it hang out with your partner. And when you do let it hang out, you don't feel criticized, but you feel accepted, maybe even cared for. But accepted is a good start. If it feels like the distance between you and your partner is growing every day, no matter how hard you try to bridge the gap, the chances are that there's a feeling of helplessness, which is a hallmark of emotional disconnection. And without intervention, it very often leads to separation and divorce. This tendency can go unnoticed for months or even years, particularly if you have children. It's very easy to be so focused on the children and the well-being of the children that you don't notice that you're not tending your relationship. You don't notice that you're becoming more and more interested in your individual pursuits and not nurturing the relationship itself. And there's nothing wrong with focusing on your individual pursuits. It's just when you stop feeding the relationship and build your individual pursuits, you not only start leading parallel lives, they start becoming divergent. And it's easy to not recognize it because you can feel like you're having success in your individual life. You can even take it to your partner and say, wow, things are going so great at work. And they can say, I'm really happy for you. And you can feel like you're supported. And yet the relationship itself is not nurtured because you're not building ways to communicate the underbelly. It's really important that we talk about our sadness, that we talk about our hurt, that we talk about our fears, that we talk about our anxiety, and that we feel safe doing it. The fact is that couples who don't address emotional disconnection early on are more likely to face divorce, and 40% of divorces cite emotional neglect as the primary factors. That means 52% of all marriages are ending in divorce, and out of that 52%, 4 out of 10 of those people are saying that emotional neglect was the primary factor, not necessarily shredding each other, not necessarily fighting over money, but just straight up emotional neglect, just feeling like they're not heard or feeling like they're not understood. Let's look at the science of this. All right, when you're feeling emotionally numb in your relationship and you're unsure why you can't connect like you used to, it's usually because your brain is having a natural response to ongoing emotional disconnection. The natural response is what? To shut down. It makes it harder to reconnect. I mean, if you feel like you're not connecting, if you feel like you're not there, you just stop trying, basically. And as we pointed out in the last episode, more and more of us are getting that sense of an artificial sense of connection and stimulation from our screen time. So when you put those things together, it gets easier and easier to neglect our relationship and not notice it. When emotional distance grows, the brain's limbic system, the emotional part of our brain, becomes less engaged. And the prefrontal cortex takes over, making emotional engagement feel like more of an effort. Like, in other words, it doesn't feel natural. It feels like we're working at it. And if we're working at it, we think, what happened to the love? I didn't used to have to work at it. Now, I want you to get, that doesn't mean that working at it is bad, right? What it means is if you're feeling like you have to work at it, you're a little behind the 8 ball. You need to work at it to get the limbic system, to get the part of your brain that takes pleasure re-engaged. All right. So don't think for a second that because you're thinking about this a lot and you're very rational about it, that that's bad. Just get that that's not an ideal place, but it's a stepping stone forward. The worst case is where you're numb and you're totally distracted. Your limbic system is somewhere else. Your limbic system is on Netflix. Your limbic system is in a video game like Xbox or something like that. You're just totally somewhere else. The more emotionally disconnected you feel, the harder it becomes to break through that numbness and re-engage emotionally with your partner. And let's talk about that numbness for a second. What is it? The numbness is avoiding uncomfortable feelings. Men do this really well, but women are getting really good at it also. When we avoid sadness, when we avoid hurt, when we avoid fear and stick with more aggressive emotions like blame or resentment or even anger, we cut off our ability to connect with other people because we connect through our hearts. But our hearts see pain in someone else, pain being what? Hurt. Pain being what? Sadness. Pain being what? fear, maybe being anxiety. When we identify that thing that we've experienced in ourselves in somebody else, that's when we connect. And when we stop connecting that way in our relationship, our emotional range gets very limited and we start feeling lonely. We start feeling emotionally lonely. We start feeling physically lonely. Have you ever felt lonely even when your partner's sitting right next to you? I bet you have. Emotional loneliness in a relationship can feel worse than being physically alone. You're constantly reminded of the connection that used to be there. Studies show that emotional loneliness in a relationship is a major risk factor for depression, anxiety, and dissatisfaction, which in turn increases the likelihood of what? Separation or divorce. And God, why wouldn't you? If you're feeling alone with someone, why wouldn't you? Because there was something there and there can be again. That's why. When we make a commitment to someone to grow in a relationship together, we accept as an inherent part of that commitment that we are both going to change, and so will the relationship, but only if we work at it. So don't lose hope, all right? Don't lose hope. Stay with me here. What I don't want you to be doing, though, is staying together for the sake of stability. If you're in a relationship that feels a little disconnected and you're telling yourself it's not that bad, you're approaching this from an angle that's not sustainable. Many couples choose to stay in emotionally distant relationships because of fear of change, or maybe they're concerned for the children, or maybe they're glad that it's not as bad as it could be. Emotional disconnection often leads couples to stay in the relationship out of habit or fear of the unknown. You don't want to be one of those people. Many people who report emotional disconnection stay together for years without realizing the slow damage. All that gray divorce that we're seeing where the kids go off to college and then they go, why are we here together? That's about that. You don't need that. You don't want that. You don't have to have that. Sometimes people will fake it, hoping that they'll make it because they get false stability. If you think that you're staying together, even though you're experiencing some disconnection and that it's better than the unknown, the chances are you're in this group. The reality is that emotional disconnection eats away at the foundation of the relationship, but even worse, it eats away at the foundation of your sense of self. You start to lose your sense of who you are. You start to lose your values, your sense of dreams, the dreams that you had. So don't stay in this just because you think that you should. Stay in it because of those dreams. Get back in touch with them. If you're going to reverse the disconnection before it's too late, you need to recognize the warning signs. You need to notice that conversations with your partner feel empty. You need to notice that that connection feels like it's fading. You need to recognize that emotional disconnection is the death knell of your relationship. In fact, you may need to kill your relationship the way it was and start a new one with this person. If you want to turn it around, you need to focus on what could be working with them. Who was that person that you married? How much of that person is still present? And who is the new person? The new person might have some strengths that you can discover. It's really easy when we're feeling disconnected, alone, and isolated to focus on the negatives, to see what we don't like about that person, to live in the problem. If you want to turn this thing around, you need to become solution-oriented. If you want to turn this thing around, you're going to need to take those emotions, those negative emotions someplace. If you can't express it to your partner, maybe you and your partner are going to need to go to someone that you can express it to. You know, there are 4 prerequisites for change. And the first prerequisite is to let go of old emotions and let go of old assumptions, things that are holding you back. And we've talked a lot about those old emotions and old assumptions in this episode. Step 2 is to create a strategy for moving forward. So you might need some help with that. You might need someone who's an expert in that. I know that you want to reconnect before it's too late. Emotional vulnerability and intentional engagement are the antidotes to emotional disconnection. It can be risky, but it doesn't have to be super risky. You can take it in baby steps. It's about first identifying a place where you know you're going to feel safe together, where you can take small chances together, whether it be with a professional or whether it's in a restaurant or whether it's only in the morning or only at night. There is a time and a place where the two of you can meet and start to take baby steps, small risks together. Do not focus on the gap between where you want to be and where you are. Focus on where you are and how far you move forward. Even if it's just 1/8 of an inch, it's forward movement. It might be 2 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's okay. The first step towards reversing disconnection is small, meaningful actions to rebuild emotional intimacy. And the way to do that, emotional intimacy starts with caring communication. You need to be able to communicate in a way that feels safe. Start by asking open-ended questions like, how are you feeling? Or what are you up to? You don't want to go to why questions so much. When you go, why are you doing that? People sometimes hear that as criticism. But if you can start with open-ended questions and maybe use some of the tools that we have for you on the Rich in Relationship website, like I statements and committed listening, those things are really going to help you to begin to have caring communication. And it's going to take time. Caring communication is about creating safety. It's about rebuilding trust. You can't have vulnerability and intimacy without safety, trust, and caring. And as we said in the last episode, start dialing down your screen time and start dialing up your relationship time. Emotional disconnection is a silent but powerful force driving the divorce rate higher. You know, as we said in one of the earlier episodes, the divorce rate before television was 2 in 1,000 people. That's like less than a percentage. The divorce rate when television became predominant, which means in some places there were 3 stations, in some places there were 5, maybe there were 7 in others. They turned the TV off at 2 in the morning, they turned it on at 7 a.m. Divorce rate went from 2 out of 1,000 to 4 or 5 out of 1,000. Now you're getting into maybe you're getting close. It's like a 0.5% divorce rate. The divorce rate today is 52%. So we went from the beginning of television to where we are now, which is screens in our pockets on demand. Make not even on demand. Screens in our pockets making demands of us to 52%, from 0.5% to 52%. That's an insane increase. And yeah, there are other things that are contributing that we've talked about in previous episodes. The antidote is to slowly build connection. Stay tuned as we continue to explore this topic. We're going to give you more tools, more information so that you can move from distraction and disconnection to caring communication and vulnerability and intimacy. Go to richinrelationship.com for more information. Thank you and have a wonderful tomorrow.